Hello everyone. These images you just saw, these pretty horrible war images, were filmed in Paris in August 1944 during the liberation. And sometimes when you look at those pictures and you see stuff lying around and you think, oh, I wish I could go back in time and maybe, pick one of those things up. And that's actually what happened in the case of this helmet. Something kind of magical. I'll show it to you now. So you see, this picture was taken by an American officer of the 156th Infantry Regiment. And he took this picture of a German grave with a helmet on it. And this is the helmet. And then he actually took the helmet off the grave and brought it back home to the United States. So now we still have it here today. It's in its exact same condition. If you look at the little white spots and stuff, some of them are even visible on the picture from 1944. So let's first of all take a look at this helmet. So here on the left side you can see there's some damage, and then there's this eagle. This flying eagle was the symbol of the German Air Force. So it's an Air Force helmet. That's also why it has this slightly blue color. Then if we look at the other side, we can see there's what looks like a bullet hole. And you look from close up and yeah, that's a bullet hole. See, it's very regular on one side, slightly less regular on the other, but it has the size of a bullet, and shrapnel doesn't make round holes like this. This is the entrance bullet hole as seen on the inside of the helmet. You can see how the metal is bent back. And then if you look at the leather of the helmet, it has this kind of red-brown stain on it at some places. Not much though. I suspect that's probably remains of blood. But what probably happened is that you saw this German soldier was buried by his friends and they put the helmet on his cross. And they probably cleaned the helmet out right after he was killed, because it was August in the summertime and stuff, and they didn't want flies to be coming along or insects climbing up on the cross to come and get the fresh blood or the dried blood. So they probably cleaned it, which is why there's only a few traces left over. Now when we look at the left side of the helmet again, now we understand that this is the exit hole of the bullet, and the damage is really impressive to look at. This is from the side, this is from another side. You see the metal is really severely bent. So if that's what happened to a steel helmet, you can imagine what must have happened to the poor soldier's flesh. See how it's all bent outwards completely like this? So now let's go into a few ballistics details about these holes. So this is what rifle or machine gun bullets look like. And if the bullet travels in this direction towards the right, you see, and there's something that's important to know is that the bullet, the back part of it is blunt, but the forward part is sharp. And what that means, since the forward part is sharp, well, not sharp, it's pointed. Since the forward part is pointed, that means it's also lighter. There's less material here. So the consequence of that is that the center of gravity of the bullet is actually towards the back of the bullet. So what happens when something is traveling towards the right but has the center of gravity at the back here? Well, to illustrate it, we'll compare it with a badminton shuttle. See, the badminton shuttle also has the center of gravity here at the back, and what happens if you send it towards the right? Well, of course, it flips around because it wants to travel heavy end first. And it's exactly the same with the bullets. What happens is that they have a natural tendency to want to travel butt end first. So to flip around and travel with the butt end first. So to counter that, there's rifling, so grooves inside the barrel of the gun that make the bullet spin. These are the rifling marks you can see here. And they make the bullet spin on its long axis, and that has the exact same effect as for a top. You make a top spin, and then instead of falling over, well, it keeps on spinning, right? So it's the same principle with the bullet. It's spinning on its long axis, so that keeps it stable. But this spinning instability is only designed to keep the bullet stable when it's traveling through air. As soon as the bullet enters something with more viscosity than air, the spinning is no longer enough to keep it stable. The gyroscopical forces aren't strong enough anymore. So what happens in real life is when a bullet goes into water, for example, or into human flesh, or here into simulant, what happens is that the bullet, after traveling in its correct position for 10 or 20 or 30 centimeters, it loses its stability, and then it starts traveling butt end first, like you can see here on the illustration. Okay, that's what happens to basically all types of rifle bullets. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, the bullet might lose its stability or it lost its stability. Losing its stability is normal. The bullet, because of its shape, the laws of physics make it lose its stability as soon as it enters something more resistant than air. So now if we think about the helmet, the entrance hole is when the bullet is still stable, traveling straight, pointed end first, so it makes a nice neat hole. And then where the exit hole is, that's where the bullet, you know, it went through the helmet, through the soldier's skull, through his brain, out of his face. So the bullet lost its stability, and that's why it makes a much bigger hole toward the exit. And these are real bullets. So these ones, see, they were fired in the air and then fell back down, so they're still in good condition. But these ones actually hit things. And you can see that the bullets are bent and torn apart. Because what happens is that when it flips over, when it spins around, it often breaks along the crimp lines. See, the bullets have a crimp here. And you can see that this one didn't break at the crimp, it did break in half. And then this one here, it broke at the crimp. So we just have the rear portion of the bullet. So that's what usually happens to rifle bullets when they hit a person. And you can see that the bullets are pretty damaged by the impact. Now let's get to researching this actual person. When we look at the cross, it says Obergefreiter Kurt Günther, born on 19th of June 1912 and died on 20th of August 1944. So I looked this guy up in the German archives. So this is him, Kurt Günther, with the same date of birth and all that. So first interesting thing I see, he died in a town called Vaucresson. And that is very, very interesting because Vaucresson is a suburb of Paris. And you see it says here that it's beside Paris. And I know that the fighting in Paris started just around this date, late August 1944. So what that means is that this helmet, or the owner of this helmet, was killed during the fighting for the liberation of Paris. What happened is that the French resistance and civilians rose up in Paris, and there was fighting for about a week. And of course, many people were killed on both sides. And but it's a historical event for France. It's the liberation of the French capital. So this helmet is linked to the liberation of Paris, which makes it very historical. And then here it says the cause of death. It says von Terroristen erschossen. So he was shot by terrorists. And this exactly confirms what I had suspected based on the date and location of death. He was killed by terrorists. So terrorists is what the Germans called the French resistance. And sometimes the French resistance called themselves that way as well, as out of humor. This guy wrote his biography here, and he wrote, "We were terrorists." And what else do we see on this card? You can see that the soldier was born in Löwenberg, and that he was in Nachrichtenbatterie of Flak Regiment 59. So that means the signals battery of anti-aircraft regiment number 59. So he was in the Air Force, which matches the eagle that we saw on the helmet. Now at the back of the card, it says the soldier's next of kin. So in this case, his wife, Magdalena Günther, address in Nuremberg, so the same place where he was born. And it also says where he was buried. So he was buried in Vaucresson, in the gardens of the Mount Vernon house. Now this is kind of funny. You might wonder what Mount Vernon has to do with Paris. See, George Washington had this house built in the US called Mount Vernon. And some rich person in Paris decided to have a replica of the house built. So this is the one in the States, and this is the one in Paris. And so it's in the gardens of this house that the soldier was buried, which is kind of ironical considering that he's a German soldier and that the Americans were coming to liberate Paris. Now his location of birth we saw is Nuremberg, and that is very bad news because this is a map of Germany before World War II, and Nuremberg was somewhere east of Dresden, somewhere around here. Okay? And what happened at the end of the war is that the Russians came and invaded Germany from the east. And of course the Russians and the Poles and nobody was very happy with what the Germans had done during World War II. So what they did was that all these eastern territories, here it was Prussia and these parts, Silesia and stuff, these parts were handed over to Poland and are no longer in Germany nowadays. And the Germans who lived there were just kicked out, so they went back to Germany. Well, they went back. Lots of them were actually born there, so they weren't going back. They were just sent to Germany. And what that means when you're doing research is that these towns are no longer in Germany, and often the archives are destroyed. The people, when you write to those town halls, they often don't care about Germans during World War II, so they might not reply to you. So usually doing research for people who were in these eastern territories that are no longer German is much, much more difficult than for somebody who's actually from what's still Germany today, from Germany proper, let's say. So this is a map of Germany nowadays, and this is where Nuremberg is, so you can see it's in Poland, which is, as I said, bad news for my research. So I did send a letter to Nuremberg, which is now called Lvovik-Sluski, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And actually in this case they were very nice and did reply. And you see somebody from the town hall said that all the archives were destroyed during World War II, so they have no information. But he said, good luck, and if possible, please inform me if you find something new. So nothing in the town hall. So often these Germans who escaped, they made associations in Germany, you know, for all the people from this town or from that region. So I did manage to find a little association for Nuremberg, and I wrote to the person who takes care of that, and she looked all through her archives and stuff, and all she managed to find was in this phone book from the 1930s. It says here, so Günther, you see, and then Kurt, postal worker, and his address, Garden Street number 2. So she wasn't sure if that was him or not. She said, that's all I have for about a Kurt Günther from Nuremberg. And she made a little announcement in the newspaper they have for the association, but nobody had any information at all. Then what I did was I wrote to the town hall in Vaucresson, and they interviewed some of the old people in the town. And what happened is that the old people remembered that there had been lots of anti-aircraft positions in the town during the war, but nobody remembered that any fighting had actually happened in the town even during the liberation. So what I think happened is that Kurt Günther was killed somewhere else, maybe in Paris, for example, and since his unit was staying in Vaucresson, they brought his body back and then they buried it in the houses they had been staying in. That's, I think, how he ended up being buried in the Mount Vernon house. So now the research was stopped for several years because at the time I couldn't get any more information. But then nowadays it's possible to actually just get soldiers' files from the Bundesarchiv in Berlin. So I asked for a copy of his file. And so here it has his next of kin, so Magdalena, just like on the card we saw before. And you see that they have her address in Nuremberg, but then they don't have any post-war address. And I haven't been able to find out anything about this woman in the meantime, and I don't know if they had children together or anything. And what I'm hoping is that maybe when this video comes out, perhaps one of his family members will happen to find the video, you know, with Google or something. But what they did have, which is a breakthrough in the Bundesarchiv, is they have the address of a Frieda Günther in Germany. In Eisfeld, Germany, so a post-war address. That means that after this Frieda Günther escaped to Germany, she contacted the archives and said, this is my new address, so if you're looking for us, this is where we can be contacted. And I don't know who this Frieda is, a sister, mother, I have no idea. But I wrote to the town hall now in Eisfeld, and they managed to give me more information. So you see, they have traces of 3 Günthers from the same family. So you have Frieda, born in 1876, so that must be the mother, logically. Then Meta, born in 1913, and Charlotte, born in 1915. So those are presumably his 2 sisters. They have no trace of the wife, unfortunately. So this was their first address after the war when they had just escaped to Germany. And then by writing to another archive in the region, I managed to find more information about what happened to the sisters. I was hoping there might be nephews and nieces and stuff like that. So they say about the mother, Frida, that she died in 1961. The first sister, Meta, it says she was in a psychiatrical hospital as of 1960, and apparently she died there in 1990, and she had no children. So you can imagine that some pretty nasty things might have happened to her for her to end up in a psychiatrical hospital for so many years. And then the last sister, Charlotte, she escaped to West Germany in 1951, and then they don't have any other information, but at the time she had no children and wasn't married. But they did know that she escaped to Köln. So I keep on following the leads right to Köln, and in Köln they tell me, yeah, we find her, and she was living at these addresses. And then she died in April 2000, and at the time that she died, she also was unmarried and had no children. So to resume, now I know that he had a wife that I've not been able to track down, and he had two sisters, both of them who died without having any children. So the trail gets cold, and I didn't find any family members, I didn't find any picture of him, even though I made pretty big efforts to try every possible lead. I also wrote to the Red Cross, and they also had nothing, so I really don't know what else I can try. So that's the end of this video. So even though we didn't find a picture of Kurt Günther, well, now we know a bit more about his history, and we have a picture of his grave, and it made us discover a bit of the history of what happened around Paris in August 1944. So I hope you found this interesting. And if any of you need help for your own research projects, you can contact me at this email address. Bye-bye, and have a nice day.